Hi, welcome. Thanks for joining us. My name is Rebecca Dimitrick, and welcome to Living with Coyotes 2023. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and read our land acknowledgement before we get started. On behalf of those in attendance, I'd like to acknowledge the space on which each one of us is present, acknowledging the original stewards of the land, acknowledging our occupation of traditional lands. In my location, it was home to the Ohlone people. We acknowledge our occupation of the land of beings who came before us, before the first humans, and beings that will endure beyond our time. May we embrace tolerance, acceptance, understanding, and coexistence to all our relations. Okay, a quick introduction. Again, my name is Rebecca Dimitrick. I've been working with wildlife for over 40 years, and in this picture, that is my wonderful husband there, who's been alongside me for about 20 of those years. Over the last decade or so, we have focused on resolving human-wildlife conflicts ethically, humanely, and sustainably. And over those years, I've handled many coyotes. Most of them were in need of some sort of rescue. And in this next video clip, I just want to show you their demeanor. They're not tranquilized or sedated, and I just want you to see how different it is than maybe a domestic dog might respond. Let's take a look. Before going any further, I want to go over a few terms you're going to hear me use. Domesticated animals are animals that have been created through artificial selection. They've been bred for certain traits like tameness. Feral is a domesticated animal that has reverted to an untamed state. Like feral cats, they're domesticated animals, not wildlife. Habituation is a term used to describe an animal's lack of response to, let's say, the sound of traffic. They no longer respond. And while you'll hear this term used a lot when talking about coyotes, it's outdated. It's been replaced with a more appropriate term, conditioned. Conditioned coyotes are those that, for example, associate food rewards with a particular person or a particular backyard. They still retain their fear of people and they still respond. They've just increased their tolerance. And this is absolutely reversible. Imprinting is what happens at a very early age when an animal starts to learn its identity. And this is not reversible. Coyotes are naturally shy and fearful of humans. They want to avoid encounters with us. However, they can become conditioned to come close if there's a significant reward for doing so. Coyotes increase their proximity tolerance for people, yards, and public places when the reward is worth it. I like to call it when the juice is worth the squeeze. Food conditioned coyotes are those that, for example, let's say they go into a backyard and they find a bowl of pet food regularly. If they encounter a human, they still exhibit normal behavior and shy away quickly. A food and human conditioned coyote is one that has been rewarded for coming close to a human, for example, when they're being hand fed or tossed food towards them. Any behavior that relates the reward to the actual human's physical presence. Either way, all of this conditioning is absolutely reversible. We just have to recondition them, reestablish those healthy boundaries. I like to call this section of my talk Coyote Deconstructed because we're going to unpack the coyote to explain the reasons why, for example, they don't have runaway populations. They don't increase in numbers exponentially, but are actually self-regulating. And why, as a species, they are thriving despite centuries of efforts to exterminate them from North America. Originally thought to have been restricted to the prairies and desert areas prior to the 1700s, new research indicates coyote was widely distributed on this continent. This map shows archaeological evidence of its existence on the West Coast and as far east as Arkansas at least 4,000 years ago. And this map follows coyotes' expansion decade by decade from 1900 to 2016. Today, there are 19 recognized subspecies of coyote, and this one is the western subspecies. Look at those long legs, and it's very slender. And then we have the slightly bigger, bulkier eastern coyote. Those coyotes in New England, for example, are known to be a bit bulkier, and their genetic makeup not only confirmed the presence of the wolf DNA, but also that of domestic dog. So yeah, it's pretty interesting. It's like Canis soup. The eastern coyote's genetic profile looks something like this: about 64% coyote, 26 wolf, and there's about 10% domestic dog in the mix. So how did that happen? Research into this hybridization between coyote and wolf indicates it occurred around 100 to 200 years ago in southern Ontario, and the dog around the same time as well. All right, so now we know the eastern coyote has a bit of wolf and dog influence and is a bit bigger, but how much bigger? Eastern coyotes weigh, and this is on average, between 30 and 45 pounds. Yes, there will be a few that will be bigger and a few that will be smaller, but this is the average range, again, for the eastern coyote. And what makes them maybe look bigger is maybe their thicker coat for that New England weather, and those long legs make them appear taller. Here's an example of the wild canids next to each other. We've got the gray fox, red fox, western and eastern coyote, the German shepherd, and the largest, the gray wolf. Okay, let's look at some other unique characteristics that can be beneficial in actually managing coyote behavior and their population density. Coyotes can lead solitary nomadic lives. We call them transients, or they can pair up and become a family unit, also known as a pack. Packs consist of the two leaders, the male and the female, the breeding pair. You can also think of them as the king and the queen. An average pack size in winter, so their normal resident pack size, is going to be between 3 and 4 individuals. That's average. Coyotes have been found to be 100% monogamous. Until death do they part. I think that's pretty cool. A dog that's 100% monogamous. The family might include a couple of helpers or associates. These are the pups from the previous year that have either stayed on or come back to be helpers to raise the pups. And the pups that have stayed on to be helpers often leave in their second year. Under normal conditions, only the king and queen reproduce. If there are any other females in the pack, they are behaviorally sterile. And this is really key. Coyotes are extremely territorial. They have a territory and they defend it from all other coyotes. In urban areas, their territories can be as small as 2 to 4 square miles. And in rural areas, as we'll see later why, they need to have a larger area, 15 to 20 miles. Solitary coyotes may roam far and wide, navigating between those occupied territories, but they don't really have territories of their own that they defend. However, there's some speculation that there may be some transients that might temporarily defend a small area while they're waiting for a vacancy to open up in very desirable habitat. So just to clarify, a coyote family will have a home range, which is basically an area they utilize, and within that area, they'll have the territory, which they fiercely defend from all other coyotes. And then you have the transient population on the outskirts, traversing areas between and around these occupied territories, just biding, waiting for a vacancy. And this is why lethal control measures to reduce coyote populations are never effective. And we'll touch on this more later. One of the ways coyotes hold territory, communicate with each other, and express emotion is through song. They're also called the song dog. And because of the variety of sounds that a coyote can make, their singing produces an auditory illusion that can make it sound like there's more of them than there actually are. This is called the bow jest effect. Let's take a listen. Okay, what do coyotes eat? Coyote is an opportunistic omnivore, which means they will eat just about anything that's not too much trouble. Predominantly, they eat rodents, followed by rabbits, and lots of fruits, vegetables, nuts, seeds, and grasses. Now, this next graphic is a pie chart, and it's just meant as an example of a coyote's diet. A coyote's diet is going to depend on location, whether it's urban, rural, or undeveloped. It's going to depend on how densely urbanized it is, and it's also going to depend on the time of year. For example, if animals are on the coast, they may consume more invertebrates, even kelp, and they've also been known to scavenge marine mammal carcasses. Now, there have been quite a few studies analyzing coyote scat and their stomach contents, um, but you've got to take that, sorry, with a grain of salt. For example, when the samples indicate the coyote has consumed deer, raccoon, opossum, cat, or dog, there's no way to know whether the coyote actually killed that animal or just scavenged its remains. Cats and dogs are not natural prey items for coyote. It's not like a coyote sees a dog or cat for the first time and wants to eat it. But it doesn't mean that there won't be physical altercations between dogs and cats where those animals might be killed and possibly consumed. Now, more studies are suggesting that coyotes may actually view dogs and cats as competition for resources rather than prey. And for those who like to crunch numbers, I just thought these were kind of interesting, especially the one on the bottom right, indicating a higher frequency of them consuming rodents, rabbits, and birds in an urban landscape. And that's a good thing because them controlling rodents protects people against other diseases. Some cities are actually taking steps to protect their resident coyote populations because of their benefit. They keep the rodent populations in check, as well as help manage urban Canada geese populations and even deer. Okay, so let's talk about food resources and coyote territories. In a natural undeveloped landscape like the wilderness and rural area on the left, food resources will be fewer and farther between than near human habitation. In a more urbanized landscape, resources are going to be more plentiful. In the urban landscape, you might find properties that are neglected, which will be attractive to rodents and other animals, and that's going to be attractive to the predators. There can be issues with sanitation, which then can attract the rodents and again attract other wildlife. There might be urban gardens or compost bins, which can attract all sorts of wildlife. And then bird seed feeders not only attract the birds, but can sustain an artificially high population of rodents, which again attracts the predators. And one of the greatest attractants in urban areas that we're seeing an increase in, unfortunately, are feral cat feeding stations. As mentioned before, coyotes and other animals will be attracted to the cat food, which can lead to altercations with cats and dogs in the area. And then some coyotes may learn to eat cats at that point. So back to the map, coyotes in a more natural habitat will need to have a larger territory in order to obtain enough food, where coyotes that utilize an urban landscape will be able to find enough food in a smaller footprint. Let's take a look at seasonal milestones. The breeding happens in winter. In spring, around March, April, maybe May in colder climates, the pups are born. They're raised through summer, and then towards fall and winter, some of the pups will begin to disperse. They go out on their own, taking their own adventure away from their territory. According to researchers, about 80% of the pups disperse in their first year, especially in urban areas. Those that stay on may replace the older helpers or associates when they turn around 2 years old. That's when they'll tend to strike out on their own and become transients. Dens are excavated tunnels about 6 feet deep or a similar type of shelter. In urban areas, they've been known to den under man-made structures, including houses. Pups stay inside the den for about 4 weeks, at which point they might start peeking out of the den. And now this is a really important note. There's this period of about 3 weeks or so when the pups are too big for the parents to actually carry by mouth to move them, and yet not old enough to travel alongside their parents. It's important to keep this in mind when investigating reports of coyote sightings in late spring and summer. For example, a coyote that doesn't want to leave an area despite being hazed heavily, it might be that there are pups there and the parents are just unable to move them. At about 8 weeks, the pups are getting a little more rambunctious able to follow their parents around. So they'll leave the den site and they'll move to what are called rendezvous sites, above ground resting areas, and they'll utilize these for the remainder of the year. It's important to know as soon as the pups start tagging along with their parents and becoming more and more independent, this is when there'll be increased sightings and encounters in your community. And even with pups close by, coyotes will be prone to running away from humans, but not dogs. Dogs are a different story. Coyotes will fiercely guard and defend their pups from other canids. For example, somebody might be walking down the street and come within yards of some pups tucked under shrubbery alongside the road, let's say. But if they were walking a dog, even a farther distance away, the parents of the pups might engage, and it might look something like this. This is not a hunting posture, but a defensive one. This animal is trying to communicate, being large and threatening, for that dog to get away. Now, the coyote may even lunge and snap to deliver its message to the dog, but there actually may be no physical contact. It's important to be very conscientious of the time of year, be aware of the seasonal milestones so you can be best prepared for encounters. Now, this next video is an example of a coyote being protective of an area where she has pups. If you'll notice, it's a nursing mom, and she's not trying to kill the dog, but she's delivering a message. Actually, I think it's pretty polite. She's trying to get the dog to leave. And just remember, we don't know what happened before the camera was turned on. Let's take a look. Okay, moving on, let's take a look at why coyotes and other wildlife are often prevalent in the urban landscape. It's understandable for people to think these animals are out of place, that they should be back in the wilds. But, like mentioned earlier, there's often more food resources in the urban landscape. In addition to an increase in natural prey items for coyotes like rodents, there's often an abundance of anthropogenic food resources that attract and sustain them. Thanks to some excellent research, we know that coyote behavior, their prevalence in a community, can be managed by managing the available food resources. Results from this study, a first of its kind, showed how removal of food resources dramatically decreased the presence of coyotes. See the diagrams on the left? The top shows lots of activity at areas where the coyotes were finding reliable food handouts, but when the food was identified and removed, the coyote activity basically stopped. Coyotes are one of a few species of wild animals that are capable of adapting to living around humans. They're called synerbic. And if we provide them enough food and shelter, they can actually thrive. The good news is we're in control. We can control the availability of food and shelter resources and thereby control the population density of these animals in the urban landscape. It is truly that simple. The equation is simple too. Where there is a food resource, you'll have consumers, you'll attract wildlife. And where there's accessible shelter, that'll encourage residency. So the answer then is really simple too. Remove the food or their access to it and reduce or eliminate shelter resources, and the animals, their presence will also be reduced. Simply put, where you have consumables, you will have consumers. Eliminate the consumables and you'll have fewer consumers, if any. Animals just don't spend time where they can't find food. So if you'll recall, we introduced these terms food conditioned and human conditioned. And I just want to reinforce this, that coyotes are naturally shy and fearful of humans, even when they're conditioned. But they can learn to tolerate us, to be in close proximity to us if they have food rewards. And this is just what happened in a Manhattan Beach area. For example, I was contracted to do a survey of their coyote population because some outdoor cats went missing, and the city was getting a lot of pressure to lethally remove the coyotes. So I spent a couple of days doing surveillance day and night and actually found the coyote family pretty quickly. They weren't living in Manhattan Beach, they were actually using a fenced off area of natural habitat in Redondo Beach, just on the border. I estimated there to be 3 animals, the matriarch, patriarch, and 1 helper, and then the pups of the year. And based on historical accounts, I felt pretty confident that the pack's range extended south a couple of miles and then north to the township boundary. But there was a different pack, or I think transients, coming in from the northwest section. And the prevalence of all these coyotes seemed to be directly related to the feeding of stray cats. Coyotes will traverse an urban landscape using what I refer to as hubs. If you notice these light blue marks here, these little contained areas, I call those hubs. They're properties that offer shelter and good hiding spots and are less frequented by people. So you can also see these 2 purple lines going up into Manhattan Beach from where they were residing down here. They were using these hubs also to get up into these areas where they were finding lots and lots of cat food and, unfortunately, cats. The point I want to make, too, is that just with a bit of investigating, you can discover the underlying cause for the increased coyote activity in a community. And it all starts with citizens reporting sightings and encounters and having a good method for collecting and archiving that important data. Not just a coyote observed at 1 or 2 in the afternoon somewhere near these 2 cross streets. But it's important to know the exact location. It's also important to know, what was the animal doing? Was it standing? Was it just walking? Resting? Did it look healthy? Or did it look sick? Coyotes that are unwell, like this one with a severe case of mange, tend to show up in residential neighborhoods looking for an easier meal. When they have mange like this, also, they get really cold, so they tend to spend time during the day warming up in sunlight. Unfortunately, we were unsuccessful at capturing this guy before he got hit by a car. Necropsy revealed, however, that he had lots of rodenticides in his system. He was doing his job, eating rodents, but he was being slowly poisoned. And just briefly, yes, mange like this is treatable. Now, this coyote, has been fed by people. He's a food and human conditioned coyote. Not a threat to public safety necessarily. It's just looking for a handout because people have trained or conditioned this coyote to come close to get rewarded. I want to explain about coyotes following people. This gets misinterpreted all the time. They think it's stalking, as if they're prey. Coyotes don't see humans as prey, but they quickly learn that we lead to food. Like this jackal in Africa is following a lion because he knows lions lead to something to eat. But sometimes, and with certain individual coyotes, they can get frustrated if they've learned to come close and are rewarded for food and they don't get rewarded. It's like putting a coin in the vending machine and nothing comes out. They get frustrated. So they might take a nip, like this. This is basically what human food conditioned coyotes do to people. It's called demand behavior. And that's probably what's going on when you hear about people being bitten on the leg or the ankle. I want to touch on what researcher Robert Tim mentions in his papers about the escalation of what he refers to as boldness in coyotes. And this is really important, especially for city officials, because it's up to us. We can prevent trouble. Coyotes don't see humans as prey, and it's questionable whether they consider cats and dogs prey items. Researchers are suggesting altercations with dogs and cats may be more related to territoriality and competition for food than predatory. And that's really important because if we reduce food attractants in residential neighborhoods, it stands to reason there will be fewer encounters and fewer quarrels. And again, it's really up to us. Humans are surrogate mentors for wildlife. We help maintain those healthy boundaries. It's up to us to keep that promise and not trick and betray these animals into coming close to us. It's our responsibility, each and every one of us. Sometimes we don't know we're causing the problem, and sometimes it's intentional. This is an extreme case where someone is luring coyotes in for food to get photographs. There was a case recently in Woodland Hills where there had been some indiscriminate trapping and killing of coyotes at an institution Meanwhile, a block away, people were hand feeding coyotes. And then a couple blocks west of that location, there was a house under construction with lots of food in the driveway. According to a neighbor of that location, there was so much food being left by construction workers, he had a hard time keeping his little dog from venturing over there. And that's where this tragic incident occurred, and I'm sure you've read about it. A toddler was grabbed by a coyote. Her dad chased the animal off, but what a terrifying thing to experience. When I heard about it, I drove down to investigate because I knew there would be a whole lot more to this story. I wanted to find out really what happened. So we had the people hand feeding the coyotes a couple blocks away, getting them conditioned to approach people for food. And then we had coyotes getting accustomed to being fed at this driveway. So the day of the incident, like clockwork, after the construction crew had left, the coyote arrived for its daily snacks and it grabbed the child. I really don't think the coyote realized this was a living being. The little girl had on a big puffy outfit and probably smelled like snacks. Just to give you an idea of the landscape, this is a pretty developed area of Los Angeles. It's the southwest end of the San Fernando Valley. Now, after talking with the neighbors in this area, it was clear that their calls and emails to city officials reporting heightened coyote activity and the feeding of coyotes went ignored. Months went by until finally a child, was bitten. And when that happens, more often than not, lethal removal is considered. And in this case, they chose to kill the entire family because there was no system in place that would have triggered investigations and preventive strategies ahead of time. This was preventable. Let's review the unique characteristics of coyote. Remember that they are territorial, so a pack of 3 or 4 individuals will keep other coyotes out of their territory. But if coyotes are killed and you happen to take out the pack leaders, one or both, the territory now opens up to those transients that are just waiting for the opportunity to take over. Now, in this next clip I'm going to show you, it's talking about an island, the populations of coyotes on the island. The island is about 44 square miles. Let's take a look.
Hi, Numi.
Hi, Ani. Come on in.
Thank you. So what are we doing today?
Well, I'm trying to animate why it doesn't work to kill coyotes.
So why has the coyote population become such an issue?
We didn't have them here to start with, and they came in from the West, and people are pretty alarmed about them because they're predators, and of course they eat pets. And they're actually becoming really abundant.
So what are people doing to control the population now?
Unfortunately, it's the old default, which hasn't worked in 150 years. It's lethal control.
So why hasn't it worked?
Because of the biology of the animals. And this is something we're working on with our tracking.
What about their biology makes this method impractical?
They're territorial, and then there are also these coyotes called transients, which make a problem.
So what are their territories consist of?
In this picture, I drew a Quidnick Island with 10 coyote families, and those families are called packs. They each have a territory that they defend. The animals that defend it are the 2 most important animals in the pack, the alpha male and alpha female. They also breed and have the puppies, but most of the year they live together, defending this territory every night, exploring around, defending the boundaries, making sure no other coyotes come in. And then there's also beta coyotes in the family group.
And the betas?
Babysitters. When the coyotes have puppies, they'll take care of them while the male and female hunt.
How many puppies do the alphas have in a year?
Well, that depends on how much food, and that's a really important point because they have as many pups as the food resources will support. So if there's more food, the female will have more puppies and up to 7 of them. Or if there's less food, she might only have 2 or 3 pups.
So what are these transients that you were talking about?
By fall, these 7 puppies are getting large and eating a tremendous amount and stressing out the parents and the beta. They're also getting hormones and challenging their parents. So the parents kick them out and they become transients. Maybe 1 or 2 stay and become betas, but the rest are just wandering the island in between the territories, trying to find a place to live. They're looking for a place to colonize. They're looking for a way in. And if all of these packs, family groups that I've shown here, have, say, 5 pups that become transient, Then we have 10 packs, 5 pups, 50 transient coyotes available to come in.
Wow, yeah, that's a lot. So, what about them makes shooting impractical?
What happens is with lethal control, often people shoot out the animals that are defending a territory and keeping other coyotes out. If you shoot a hole in that territorial boundary and 50 transients available to colonize, a lot of those animals will flow in, and you'll actually have more coyotes than you had to start with.
So, how do we manage coyotes?
Basically, by managing ourselves. We provide so many food subsidies to coyotes, it's unbelievable. If we stop providing food like farm livestock waste, garbage, dump site foods, cat food in cat colonies, pet food outdoor, the coyote populations will drop to a level sustainable by natural food resources like mice. They won't be going into residential areas and interacting with humans. If we manage ourselves, coyotes will manage themselves.
Okay, another easy equation to keep in mind. 1 minus 1 equals 1. Whenever you remove one animal that you think is a problem to resolve your problem, it's not going to work because another animal is just going to fill that vacancy in the hospitable habitat. So, if you can think about the coyote's unique characteristics, they keep other coyotes out of their territory, right? And if, as a community, you can reduce the anthropogenic food subsidies, forcing your resident coyotes to rely on natural prey as much as possible, the coyotes might actually need to increase their territory to find enough food, which is a good thing, because then you'll have fewer coyotes inhabiting that landscape. And then, if you allow this resident family to age in place, theoretically, the breeding pair will have fewer and fewer offspring as they age, yet they'll defend their territorial boundaries and provide you with 24/7 rabbit and rodent control. I mean, what's not to love about that? It's a win win. So, how do we get there? We get there by implementing strategies for resolving and preventing conflicts with coyotes and other wild canids that balance respect for wildlife while prioritizing public safety. Strategies that are based on the latest scientific research and the most current best practices and management tools. The guiding principles of a canid response plan include, of course, human safety being a priority, respect for the value of wild canids in the urban landscape, the importance of preventive strategies, and understanding that the removal of wild canids is not effective in reducing their numbers or preventing conflicts. The plan outlines the important components critical for its success. First and foremost, it requires the development of a streamlined system by which to receive reports from the community. A centralized way to collect and log data, including a system for mapping encounters. We provide guidance on what data to collect and how to interpret it, which will dictate the level of response. Consider the differences among these scenarios. A coyote simply crossing the street at dusk, a coyote loitering on someone's front lawn midday, or a group of them returning to a certain area on a daily basis. Using various methods of investigation, responders will be trained to uncover the underlying cause and assess what level of response is appropriate and how to mitigate the problem if there is one. Complete and accurate data collection is paramount. And it's imperative, too, that the person or persons evaluating that data be knowledgeable on wild canid behavior and familiar with the current methods for resolving conflicts. For example, they'll know to first consider the time of year, the seasonal milestones, or they'll look for food attractants nearby. Could there be pups in the area, or is it dispersal season when sightings are going to naturally increase? Now, we're not looking to excuse an animal's behavior, but to understand it, understand what's behind it, because that is the only way we're going to identify a solution that's going to work long term. The second component of the plan is an educational program, both for first responders to train them on coyote behavior and hazing, as well as educational programs for the general public. The plan also encourages adding or strengthening laws that might help prevent conflicts, like a no feeding wildlife bylaw or stricter policies regarding dogs off leash. In adopting our Canid response plan, the municipality is committing to implementing a program to monitor and respond to wild canid activity quickly and proficiently. The actual response will likely be handled through the police or animal control operations or a third party contractor or a combination. Our plan recommends using what's called the SARA model for investigating canid encounters, and this should be familiar to law enforcement. SARA stands for Scanning, Analysis, Response, and Assessment. Scanning is the initial phase of data collection. Analysis is the investigative stage, fact gathering and research. Response will be guided by the incident flow chart, which I'll show you next, which helps responders determine the best course of action based on the data they've collected. And lastly, the assessment stage calls for self-evaluation of the program. Now, this is a sample of our 5-page response guide. It classifies coyote behavior and common issues and provides guidance to first responders on what the most appropriate response should be, including what behaviors might elicit lethal removal. For example, if an animal is sick, injured, or debilitated, it should be removed from the environment and evaluated, possibly rehabilitated. Where there's been confirmation that a coyote has bitten someone unprovoked, or a coyote is displaying extraordinarily aggressive behaviors towards people unprovoked and for no reason, then lethal removal might be considered, but only after exhaustive investigations, and all efforts will be made to remove only that individual animal. It is understood and agreed that indiscriminate removal shall be avoided if at all possible. Our plan is a living document. It's meant to be revised as new science becomes available or new and better methods are discovered. We provide municipalities with a template to be customized based on their environment, the land use, the type of wild canids inhabiting their area. We assist in development and implementation, and whenever needed, we provide boots on the ground support with investigations, coyote population surveys, and neighborhood audits, looking for the reasons why coyotes are prevalent or exhibiting certain behavior. We are also available to our partnership locations to supply intensive hazing as needed. To be clear, our plan is not simply a strategy to educate the general public. It's meant as a tool for town officials and their first responders, a guide to help them make the right decisions, the appropriate level of response based on what's being reported. For example, remember this guy loitering in a shopping mall parking lot? The flow chart would dictate a field response is required to conduct a thorough investigation looking for why the animal is behaving this way. It will also require direct hazing by trained responders over a period of a few days to a week to reestablish healthy boundaries. We provide our partner communities with ongoing training for their first responders, police, and animal control officers, making sure they are up to date on the most current science and best practices. We teach them how to read coyote behavior and how to effectively haze. We also provide educational material like door hangers and brochures, again, customized for their community. Our plan also includes a Canid-Safe neighborhood checklist that can be given to residents. It offers recommendations to make one's property less attractive to coyotes, less hospitable, also how to protect pets and even livestock. It's also meant to be a conversation starter among neighbors because it does take a village. Here's the thing though, these plans are only as good as the pages they're published on if they are not worked, if they're not followed. And we see this a lot. Cities will adopt coyote response plans, but never follow through. So we added a section in our plan requiring that first responders, the ones working the plan, conduct regular meetings to evaluate the functionality of the program. Is it working? Is there room for improvement? And to share that information with city officials on a regular basis. And just lastly, I want to explain why we call it a canid response plan is because most places will have a variety of wild canids, gray fox, red fox, coyote, and in some areas, wolf. Okay, so now let's talk about how to protect your pets and your property from coyotes. So if you're worried about coyotes coming into your yard, or let's say you have a large livestock or chicken area that you want to keep coyotes out of course, there's a coyote-proof fence design. It was developed in the 1980s. It needs to be at least 5 feet high, but most importantly, it's the extensions outward at the top, at the 45-degree angle, and then there's an extension at the bottom, sometimes called a wire apron. It's an extension outward. With those two things, you can keep coyotes and other wildlife out. You can use existing fences. You don't have to build a whole new fence if you have a pretty good fence in place right now. The important thing to understand is Coyotes, like other dogs their size, can leap only over about 3 feet, but coyotes can actually scale a 6 foot, even higher fence fairly easily. So it's not so much about the height, it's about these unique extensions. Here's a picture of some coyote fencing that was installed in Los Angeles by a colleague of mine, Sam Ramirez. The wire mesh is attached to the existing fence and then secured to the ground. It can also be trenched and buried, but as long as it extends outward far enough, trenching isn't necessary. It just has to be tightly secured to the ground. Another way to keep coyotes from scaling over a fence is something called a coyote roller or a roller bar. When an animal tries to actually get right over the fence at the very top, the roller spins and the animal loses its grip. It can be pricey, but it's effective if installed correctly. Now, if you're looking for maybe a commercial solution to those extensions, there's something called the perfect fence. These systems are intended to keep cats from escaping a yard, but they can also be used at the top of fences to keep other wildlife, including coyotes, out. But again, they're great for keeping cats in. If you're looking for something with a top on it to keep your cat protected, consider a catio. Very popular. Just Google the word catio and you will find some amazing designs that allow cats to enjoy the outdoors while keeping safe. I recommend checking out these two websites. I really like Custom Catio and Catio Spaces. The one pictured here was built by my colleague, again, Sam Ramirez, who runs Humane Pest Control in Los Angeles. Is it ever safe to let your cat outside to roam freely? No. I just want to share with you, I know firsthand what it feels like to lose a pet to a coyote. And of course, I felt horrible and responsible. And there wasn't anyone else well, I could blame my mother, but there wasn't anybody else to blame, just me. I didn't realize, though, how dangerous it was to let her be an indoor-outdoor cat where I lived. And now I know. Now I know how to keep my cats safely protected. Now, while this presentation is about coyotes, it's also about keeping our pets safe and not attracting coyotes into our neighborhood. So I just want to throw this out there. And this really pertains to more the feral cats, the cats that are on the streets. And they don't belong there. If you're a cat owner, you know how much cats love warmth. They need and deserve reliable, safe shelter, companionship, and they need vaccinations. The long-coated cats require grooming. They're going to get matted. They should also have regular checkups or at least be monitored because, as most cat owners know, cats are prone to ailments. About 40% of adult cats will suffer a disease called tooth resorption, a horribly painful condition. And as cat owners also know, they're susceptible to urinary tract diseases and respiratory issues. Many of the respiratory diseases can be asymptomatic and yet spread to other felines. As for the environment, the domestic cat is an invasive predator responsible for killing billions and billions of birds and mammals each year, and they are the definitive host for a microscopic parasite called Toxoplasma gondii, meaning felines, cats, are the only source of infective oocytes or eggs. Cats can shed millions of these oocytes in their feces for about 1 to 2 weeks. The eggs can survive in the feces, water, or soil for months to years. Humans and other animals become infected through ingestion. Seals, sea otters, and whales have been found infected and dying from toxoplasmosis because of cats. These are all good reasons to advocate that cats be contained. And they deserve it. They deserve sanctuary. And that's just what this program offers. I'm putting this out there especially for those city officials who may be looking for ways to manage their feral cat populations. This was written by a couple of veterinarians in Florida. It's a process where feral cats would eventually be off the streets and in sanctuary, where they could live out their lives protected from the environment and the environment protected from the cats. It's a win-win. Okay, moving on to aversion conditioning. Aversion conditioning is a suite of tools we use to reestablish and reinforce healthy boundaries with coyotes and wild canids. Remember, coyotes are always afraid of humans. They retain that fear even when they've been conditioned to come close to us for food. when they've increased their proximity tolerance for us. So what aversion conditioning does is just help reestablish those boundaries. This is a tool we use called Yard Enforcer. It's a motion activated unit, runs off batteries, and it can be set to go off day, night, or both. It squirts water like a sprinkler. What I like about it is you can have it spray either in a straight line or fanned out. You can also attach multiple units to different hoses and it'll go off at the same time. So I really like that brand. Let's see it in action. And this is called Yard Sentinel. There are a lot of these motion activated light and sound producing units out there, but I like this one. They're pretty reliable. They run off of batteries. You can adjust the sound. They have varying sounds and you can adjust the volume. And again, whether it goes on day or night or both. Now, something like this would be effective if you're having coyote issues in and around your property and you've taken away the attractants and now you just want to make your yard kind of scary. But I would only use it for a few weeks and then take it down for a period of time. And then if you have to, put it back. You just want to change things up a bit, be unpredictable. Even if it's just moving patio furniture around, that can really freak the coyotes out. Okay, Mylar ribbon. This is also called scare tape. You can find it in most garden stores. If you cut strips of this and hang so that it dangles from like low branches, its reflections and the noise that it can make in the breeze can be disturbing to coyotes and other animals. It'll cause them some concern when approaching your yard. I recommend using the Mylar strips in conjunction with the stronger deterrents, the sprinkler and the sound emitter, so that they can associate the ribbon with those other units, with the water and the noise. That means you can sometimes take those other things away and still leave the Mylar for a period of time and have the same effect. Also, I recommend taking strips of Mylar ribbon about 2 to 3 feet in length and taping them to the top of a small stick, like a bamboo gardening stake, and make a little like pom-pom, just 3 or 4 strips at the top. And when you go walking, you can use that as a prop to make yourself look like big and scary and noisy and silly, but it'll work. It'll work with the coyotes. Again, that's called a scare stick. If you have it, if you don't have to have a coat on and you have your back pocket accessible, you can just stick it in there and walk with it. But look, make sure if you're walking with your dog, make sure your dog or dogs are used to this. You don't want to just surprise them with this, because that can really be a problem. Okay, so get your dogs conditioned to you using the scare stick. Nope, it's not lemonade. It's urine. Human urine can be used to discourage wildlife of all kinds, including coyote. It can be applied around shrubbery or on strips of material. But seriously, just act like you're marking your territory. I know it sounds really weird, but it works. And again, you only want to do these things when you think you're going to have a problem with coyotes. If there's this increase of coyote activity on your street or on your property. And just to note, we don't recommend any of the commercially produced wildlife urine because of animal welfare concerns. And we don't recommend the wolf urine in particular because I'm not sure it might not attract rather than deter other canids. Anyway, we know human urine works and it's cheap and easy to come by. Now, listen, I just want to go over this one other tool that you have. If you're worried about the safety of your dog in your backyard, let's say you need to take your dog out at night and you want to know if there's been any activity out there, I recommend a Wi-Fi surveillance camera like this one. It'll notify you when there's been activity in your yard, day or night, so you can feel more at ease. In the front yard, too, it can catch activity on the street, which really helps in identifying coyote travel patterns and locating hotspots. This is the brand we really like. It's solid, easy to set up. If you do get one and you want any helpful tips, don't hesitate to reach out to me. Okay, but listen, it's really important that these strategies, making your property uninviting, must accompany the removal of attractants, not just from your yard, but on your street, in your neighborhood. Another reason to use those Canid-Safe neighborhood checklists and engage in a dialogue with your neighbors. Okay, let's talk about coyote and dog interactions and what to prepare for. Remember, dogs and coyotes are closely related, and it's not unheard of for them to actually be friendly and playful with dogs. They are probably youngsters and not yet aligned with a pack. So let's take a look. I just want to show this to you. The dog is like, what? Okay, more often than not, though, an adult coyote, especially paired coyotes, are going to see your dogs as competition, a threat for their territory or food resources. And their tolerance, though, is going to fluctuate depending on the season. There's a higher chance for altercations in winter during their breeding season. And then again, later spring and summer when the pups are traveling between, remember those rendezvous sites. So when you're walking your dog, always have it leashed. And we recommend between a 4 and 6 foot leash, not an extender leash, because this is basically your dog being off leash to a coyote. Your proximity to your dog, 6 feet or under, should be enough to keep the coyotes from coming close. There will be those times you may not be aware of it, but there could be pups nearby, and you'll get that coyote displaying with that hunched back and maybe even taking a nip from the behind. Just be super aware. And not that you have to have props for hazing, for chasing those coyotes off, but sometimes it gives folks a little more confidence and it can extend your reach. The props include an air horn, like a small pocket air horn, makes a loud noise, rescue whistles, the scare stick I talked about, a penny can or a shaker, that's a noisemaker, an umbrella. If you carry an umbrella with you and open it up, that becomes super scary. Or better yet, a trash bag, the simplest hazing prop of all. You can have it folded up in your pocket, and if necessary, you can bring it out, whip it in the air so it collects air, and whip it again so it makes noise. You become this giant, billowy, crazy thing that will really scare a coyote. Still, on a heavily conditioned animal, you may have to advance. You may have to actually walk towards the animal. Hazing is about making yourself look big and bad and scary. You can use your voice, your hands, clap, use the props, but one of the most effective things is going to be your movement towards the animal. I know that sounds maybe scary to some folks, but it's essential. Just to be clear, hazing will not be effective if you're in your car, honking your horn, yelling, or if you're on the balcony or inside your house yelling out the kitchen window. That doesn't message anything to a coyote. They have to see you, your body, the predator. Hazing is pretty simple. If you've ever protected your meal from your dog, then you have successfully hazed a canid. You have to make that animal understand you mean business. If it just stands there and stares at you, you need to keep advancing, moving forward until that animal moves off and away and preferably out of sight. If the animal doesn't move off and you retreat or you go back inside your house or your car, this sends the wrong message to the coyotes. It makes you look submissive, and this will cause them to be even more tolerant and comfortable around humans. When there's high coyote activity and folks are unable to properly haze them, then that's the time trained professionals should be called in to apply hazing strategically. It doesn't take long to reinforce the boundaries, even with coyotes that are highly food and or human conditioned. And again, that's why a response plan is so important because it sets up these teams ahead of time so they can respond quickly. Hazing is not something you do every time you see a coyote. If you're in a natural environment, hiking on a nature trail, and you see a coyote ahead of you, just crossing your path at a respectful distance, which I would say 3 car lengths, there's no need to impose on that coyote. If you see a coyote walking down your street day or night, and again, it's about 3 car lengths away in front of you and it's walking away, you probably don't need to do anything. However, if it's closer or it begins walking towards you, or if it just stands its ground as you approach, quickly run through the seasonal milestones, take note of its body posture, and see if you can read any messaging. What is it trying to tell you? Is it staring at you in your eyes, or is it staring at your dog? Could there be pups nearby? Are its ears pricked forward in a curious manner, or are they more flat? Take a quick survey of the landscape and decide what direction you want to send that coyote in and how far. Make note of traffic because you certainly don't want to drive it into traffic and cause an accident. And you don't want to make it feel cornered either. Just try and get the coyote to move off and, if possible, out of your sight. Again, if the majority of residents are unable or unwilling to successfully haze coyotes in your community, and there are reports of coyotes not responding, this is when the municipality must send in professionals to turn the coyotes' behavior around to reestablish those healthy boundaries. Okay, I'm going to conclude my presentation with this. Coyote behavior, their presence, their prevalence in the urban landscape mirrors human behavior. And so I hope I've shown you that for us to see a shift in coyote behavior, there must be a shift in human behavior. And I hope I've also shown that coexistence is absolutely possible. Thank you so much for watching and listening, and please feel free to reach out to us at any time if you have any questions or concerns, or if you'd like to set up a meeting regarding our Canid response plan. Thank you so much.